Board games have some nerve, don't they? They were not just content to ruin my marriage and my third grade birthday party. No, they have also endeavored to ruin human civilization itself. Or worse, actually, the series of computer strategy games with the same name. That's how the story goes, at least. The Civilization franchise is turning into a board game, and that is a bad thing. As if board games were not the coolest thing ever. This is an accusation that is constantly levied at the series, and it's one that I've actually grown to agree with. Still, I wouldn't say that this point of view is super coherent. I've gone through a lot of forum discussions on the topic, and the reasons that people give for how this is occurring are not consistent. Contradictory, sometimes, even. But I suspect that some of these people are picking up on real trends that they can't articulate or substantiate. So, that's my mission today. I want to put forth a steelman case as to how Civilization is becoming more like a specific type of board game. Why that makes the later games, like Civilization 6, so good, and why we might have missed out on something cool in the process. But before I explain what I'm talking about, I want to make it clear what I'm not talking about. First, Ed Beach used to design board games. This is Here I Stand, one that he's pretty well known for. This background probably influenced his work developing Civ 6, but I'm not going to give that too much weight in this discussion. When I'm talking about Civ becoming a board game, I'm also not talking about the graphical style of the series. As the series has progressed, the game has taken on an increasing number of visual cues that are reminiscent of board games. For example, Civilization 5 swapped squares and diamond tiles for hexagons, something you might associate with newer board game design. Civ 5 was more realistic, but the effect was really pronounced with Civilization 6, which was more stylized. Civ 7 has this ornate toy box thing going on. Check out the ripple when I move my scout here, and the difference in elevation between these hexes. Compare that to something like Heroscape, and I think you can see some similarities. Also, Civilization 6 introduced policy cards. Rotating out cards with different powers is extremely board game coded to me. Also, the way that the game boots up, you get this little info sheet about your faction. Notice the icons for the different resources and yields. Compare that to these faction cards you're given in Dune Imperium. Obviously, the Civ 6 ones have a bit more of the mucho texto thing going on, but that's just because the game is so complex. After all, it is designed by the same guy who made the Henry's Wives pregnancy chart. But this is all just visual style. It doesn't have much of an impact on the gameplay. Civilization 1 and Civ 3 have very randomized combat. They could have just as easily had dice appear on the screen to show the results of a battle. This would make it feel more like a board game, but it wouldn't really change anything significant, and to the extent that it did, I think that it would be pretty cool. Board games are objects that you collect and keep in your house. The aesthetics of the design are part of the appeal. They also need to be very visually clear and easy to parse, because there's no computer, there's no UI pop-ups, the players have to run the game themselves without assistance. I've criticized Civ for moving from stylized icons to realistic ones, and board games are almost always heavily stylized, so I have no problem with this. I think when it comes to visuals and iconography, this is a cool direction for the franchise to take. But gameplay is a different issue. When it comes to rules and mechanics, board games are a bit hard to generalize. There are thousands of board games, and they resemble thousands of computer games. Civilization 1 drew influence from the Avalon Hill Civilization board game. Advanced Squad Leader has a lot of similarities to Panzer General. Stardew Valley has a suspicious number of similarities with Stardew Valley the board game. Maybe this was plagiarized. And Caveman to Cosmos most resembles Campaign for North Africa. I don't think we can say that Civilization 6 has anything in common with zombie dice, so we need to be more specific here. There is a particular type of board game that the newer Civ titles resemble, and to explain what those are, we're going to need to do that annoying video essay thing where I go through the entire history of commercial board games. Don't worry, I swear this all pertains to the topic at hand. Okay, so as you know, games like chess and Go date back thousands of years. But the industry of mass-produced board games, as we know it, started in the 19th century. Typically, these games were meant for families and not explicitly meant to be competitive or have a ton of replayability. Balance and good game design were not yet at a sophisticated level, or simply were not the main priority. They were typically based around a strong theme, Often these themes were related to morality or social issues. Popular titles included The Mansion of Happiness, The Game of Life, and a bit later Monopoly, which was originally designed to make people hate landlords. Although they mostly ended up hating their siblings, incredible that they failed at this task, considering how easy it is to make people hate landlords, but whatever. Some of these titles became household staples in the mid-20th century, along with newcomers like Clue and Risk. Many of these are extremely dependent on luck, like Candyland and Snakes and Ladders, and some of them are quite cutthroat to fit with their theme, like Monopoly and Risk. For most people in the general public, when they think of board games, these family games are the type that they think of. But there is another style of board game, which Civ players would probably be decently familiar with too. You see, the American board game industry developed in a pretty linear fashion from these traditional family games. Lots of randomness, strong theming, but European games developed in their own way, often more inspired by classic, abstract games. These games are less reliant on luck. They're a bit more abstract. In Germany, there was an aversion to war and fighting for cultural reasons after World War II, so you can block players by taking what they want first, but it's rare that you're in direct conflict with them. As a result, there aren't very many big swings. There's no player elimination. Instead, the game might end if you reach a certain number of victory points. And they're just generally about careful planning and development. When I say that Civilization is becoming more like a board game, this is the specific type of board games that I'm talking about. A lot of these have particular gameplay patterns, worker placement games, deck building games, and most relevantly, engine building games. In Civilization 6 terms, this leads to a game focused on injecting disgusting yield combos straight into your veins. For lack of a better term, the gameplay is masturbatory, but I do not mean that in a pejorative sense. The principal appeal is carefully solving a puzzle and setting up an elaborate chain of interlocking bonuses to fly ahead of your competition. When I'm planning my districts, I feel that same sense of satisfaction that I do when I place tiles in a game like Azul or Cascadia. To reiterate, this is good. European-style board games are very popular, and the common opinion is that they have better game design than American-style board games. In older Civ games, faction bonuses were like, you get this building for half the price, or this type of tile has an additional yield. In Civ 6, faction bonuses are often, whenever X happens, you get Y. You can see how this would lead to engine-building gameplay. You can find a similar dichotomy in Magic the Gathering. Traditional 1v1 games had a lot of direct interaction with the opponent, but a newer format, Commander, is a 4-person free-for-all where players build up before they start fighting. You'll see a lot of cards like this, and you can find that same pattern. Whenever X happens, you get Y. To be clear, Commander sucks for a bunch of reasons that don't really apply to Civ 6, but in both, players interact with the choices that they've already made, instead of interacting with developments in the world around them. I am generalizing here. In Civ 5 and 6, you can still fight early and conquer. Older games in the franchise still gave you the option to build and chase synergies, but newer games in the Civ franchise definitely walk a few steps in that particular direction. So, newer Civ games are akin to European-style board games, and as fate would have it, older Civ games have some similarities with American-style board games. Like American board games, affectionately referred to as Ameritrash, the older Civ games are more luck-based. They have more elimination, and more direct interaction. I would also like to put forward the idea that the older Civ games do a better job of selling you on the theme, at least mechanically. The later Civ games are more inwardly focused. The earlier ones are more outwardly focused. The world tells a story, and the game isn't all about you. Look at the replay that I'm showing on screen. You're seeing big, swingy, back-and-forth changes in the geopolitical shape of the world. Watching this, you are captivated. I might as well have Subway Surfers on the screen right now. In Civ 5, without mods, the meta strat is to stay on 5 cities the whole game, so the replay has less going on. Civilization 6 just straight up removed the replay function, and also the ability to fully trade maps. There's just not that much to see. Nations expand, the city-states get gobbled up, and maybe there is one Civ that conquers another. Things are relatively static until one Civ gets enough victory points or whatever, and then the game ends. This also applies to the smaller pieces of these games. Take religion in Civ 4 versus Civ 6. In Civ 4, you have some control, but often religions feel like they have a life of their own. And generally, 2 or 3 spread further than the others, which leads to coalitions breaking out. In Civ 6, it's basically one religion per Civ. Most Civs get 1, and you cannot have 2. It doesn't feel like a force of its own. It feels like part of an engine that you are building. Civ 6 is also generally more incremental and balanced, but history was actually kind of Ameritrash, and Civilization 3 reflects this. The Industrial Revolution feels like the Industrial Revolution. All across the world, suddenly cities just balloon in size. Combat grinds to a halt, defense becomes king, you get this trench warfare with massive artillery stacks that you cannot break through until you unlock tanks and bombers. For the whole game, there are no buildings that directly increase your production. With one technology, industrialization in Civ 3, you can double your production in every city. In Civilization 6, you can maybe have similar swingy breakpoint moments. For example, factories give you +3 production to all city centers within 6 tiles. Now, if 100 turns ago you had planned out bespoke industrial zone placements to reach as many city centers as possible, you could have a bonus comparable to, or maybe even bigger, than the one I just mentioned for Civ 3. But the AI sure as hell aren't going to do that, so you don't get these big transformative global shifts. Railroads don't change the world, they just add a little piece to your engine and increase your era score. So, in my opinion, the older Civ games were more thematic. You felt more like a participant in global history, and the weight of history felt like it had a stronger impact on the different phases of your game. But I don't want to overhype things. I realize that I'm presenting a rose-colored glasses version of Civilization 3. In reality, some areas fall flat in terms of theme, the expansion phase is way too fast, and while wars in Civ 3 are swingy and very back and forth, the world trends towards having fewer nations with increasingly large and unstoppable empires. It would really benefit from break-off regions declaring independence, like they do in Civ 4. This is an issue here, because Civilization 6 is so good at being a European-style board game, while Civ 1 to 4 are only kind of good at being Ameritrash simulators. I'm comparing the perfect execution of Civ 6 to the potential of where the series could have gone, which was never properly articulated by the earlier games in the series. I'm hoping that fans of the older Civ games are smart enough to extrapolate from what we actually got. Or too dumb to tell the difference. Both of those would suffice. Anyway, that's how theming works. With regards to the other criteria, the older Civ games are American-style board games at their finest. Civilization 2, in particular, has these huge, splashy effects from the wonders and governments, but I think the best way to visualize the differences is to look at multiplayer Civ. Civ 3 multiplayer is all about slamming units together. Building is important, but the fighting starts quite soon, even if you're playing free-for-all. The games are very swingy, and RNG is super prevalent. Players get eliminated through city elimination and regicide. Score does exist as a tiebreaker, but if the meta changes and people start playing for score, then either the scenario gets patched or we switch to playing a different mod. This is the Ameritrash multiplayer experience. Civ 6 multiplayer is all about building an engine. 80% of free-for-alls go something like this. You spend 3 to 4 hours building up, and at that point, players look at the number in the top right corner of the screen and call the game based on whose truck is the biggest. Typically, nobody dies and nobody fights. The point is to grow so big that you could kill everybody, but doing so would just be going through the motions, and the game is already over. So interactions are indirect, competing for city-states, competing for wonders, and great people. This is exactly like a European-style board game. So the criticism of Civilization becoming a board game is simultaneously completely unfounded, but also taps into some deep changes over the course of the series. Civilization has always kind of been like a board game. It was literally inspired by an American board game. Just the type of board game that it most resembles has changed in the past 30 years. Earlier games had the feel of an American-style board game. They were swingy, random, cutthroat, and more focused on theme. The recent Civ games, particularly Civ 6, are more similar to European-style board games. They have less luck and direct interaction, and more focus on puzzle solving and stacking bonuses with careful planning. Both of these styles are incredible, but it feels bad to admit this, but the newer games do a better job at delivering upon their potential in this regard. Alright, that's all for today. I'm not going to recommend you another video of mine this time, because you should probably get the dishes done now, rather than later. See you guys next time. Take care, everybody. Cheers.